Welcome you to Virtual Member Orientation, a new way of onboarding VISTA members. We're so happy that you're here, and I want to introduce our speakers for today. I've already introduced myself, but now I would also like to introduce Andy King, training specialist with the AmeriCorps VISTA program, Eileen Conaboy, our VISTA acting director, and Patrick Triano, the training director for AmeriCorps VISTA. I'm now going to go ahead and turn it over to Patrick, who is going to kick us off. Patrick, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica, very much, and welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you on the phone. Today's agenda is specifically focused on the virtual member orientation. So first, we want to highlight the motivation for this project, and then we'll focus on changes to the orientation, specifically the benefits and risks to a virtual training model, the structure and the process of this model, the curriculum in the orientation, communications that will be going to members and sponsors, yourself, and the responsibilities of the sponsors and the supervisors. Throughout, we'll pause for question and answer, but at the very end of this presentation, we'll also pause to take questions and answers. And so with that, let us take a look at the motivations for this project, and let me introduce to you Eileen Conaboy, Acting VISTA Director.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick, and hello to everybody out there in cyberspace and on the phone. This is Eileen Conaboy, Acting Director for VISTA. Before I jump into this, and I'll be brief because I know you all are operational folks who are keeping these projects afloat and very interested in the nuts and the bolts, but just really want to thank you so much for the inordinate amount of work you all do every day to support the VISTAs. I know it's a lot of time and effort that goes into the supporting and the supervising and the navigating around the VISTA members and the project in itself, so thank you very much. I think this is a very exciting change, and I know folks we've had the chance to talk this through with agree that the virtual member orientation, the purpose of this, the prime purpose in terms of the motivation is really greater flexibility. We have a couple different motivations here, and I'll touch on those. But really, you all know better than anyone that the recruitment uncertainty and the timing everything to get on the right onboarding train at the right time for a particular event, it's you know, even in the best of scenarios, it's very tricky on that front. And by doing this and taking advantage of the technology that's out there and all of the work through this partnership with you all, we do believe that we can do this well and using this technology to do this asynchronous, just-in-time training so that VISTAs can onboard as you all need them to come on board for your project. So you'll hear more about that in just a minute. Another piece is the budget uncertainty that is not news to anybody, certainly from last week, and just in being a federal program. We need to make sure that we are prepared and optimized for the most nimble of operations for any scenarios and curveballs that could be thrown at us. I think by having something that makes sure that we're able to very strongly onboard folks at many different times in uncertain waters really girds our program in ways that we need to be prepared for. The other piece here is just that VISTA, apart from any, I don't mean to make it sound like this is sheerly reactive because it really isn't. Proactively, we want greater flexibility. We've heard you. We know that that's what folks are asking for. But it also is something that VISTA has really undertaken in the last couple of years to look for new and innovative ways to be more streamlined, more simplified, by bringing strength in-house for training, for our nimble training operations that allows us to be able to pivot and produce and offer different types of training as the needs arise, as different priorities arise. But it also is very hard when our resources, as much as we know everybody loves PSO, as a VISTA alum, I certainly loved my PSO. They're done so well. The satisfaction levels are so high. But we also know that by investing so much of our resources on that front end before the VISTAs do show up for their first day of service, keeps us from being able to do as much as we would like further on in their service and throughout their cycle of service. So that in-service training, for example, is something we really want to buttress and build up so that after folks have a chance to get to their projects and know what the questions are, know kind of what awaits them, trying to figure out ways to have additional touch points and build that up as well. So I know there's a lot more to talk through, but I did want to just say thank you for your always being willing and able to be nimble yourselves in this agile operations. I think we've got a lot of exciting things this year, and I know they're in the best of hands with our training unit and our state office staff. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Patrick, and I look forward to tuning in.
Eileen, thank you. All right. So let's take a look at the overview of these changes that Eileen has alluded to. So this year, both the in-person PSO, we refer to it as the PSO Classic, and the virtual member orientation will be implemented, all right? But please recognize that the virtual member orientation is replacing what we refer to as the PSO blend. It's a different model. Okay. Secondly, the webinar series for members, supervisors, and leaders will be developed into other media. And by that, I'm talking about audio, podcasts, videos, and recorded and edited webinars, so that we can develop a kind of grab-and-go multimedia site. And then finally, in-service training will become a focus of the VISTA training unit in 2019, once this transition is well underway. So we look forward to turning our focus to the curriculum and implementation of those in-service face-to-face trainings come October of this year. All right. So let's move on, and I'll turn this over to Andy to give us a quick overview of what the benefits and the risks to this kind of model are.
All right, thank you, Patrick. So there are a number of benefits, and you can see them outlined here on the screen, particularly regarding VISTA members. By having the virtual orientation, it gives us the opportunity to offer onboarding opportunities a lot more often than we can now. And in fact, once this is fully operationalized, we could see them as often as every 2 weeks. So once every VISTA pay period, we could have new VISTAs coming on board. It also allows us to have shorter enrollment deadlines than we do with our regular face-to-face PSOs, because we don't have to worry about reserving hotel rooms and booking airplane tickets and all of that. We can have a shorter deadline. Right now, it's the enrollment deadline is 17 days ahead of the start date, and we're going to continue to look at that and see if we could shorten that even further. But we also want to be fair to the VISTA member to make sure they've got adequate notice to do all of the things they need to do to be prepared to start when they show up at their project site. Again, in contrast to our classic PSOs, the virtual orientation has no enrollment limit. There's no maximum to the number of people that we could have start in any particular cohort. As mentioned, there's no travel required for the training, so that simplifies things, and particularly for those who might have family responsibilities or have physical or medical conditions that make travel difficult. We see this as an ease for them. The virtual training is self-directed, so that means people can learn at their own pace, they can take the time they need, and they can do it when they're at their best. So, you know, some of us are morning people and others are not. So the learner can choose, you know, when they're most effective and when they can best engage in the learning activities. There are a couple of live touch points, one just prior to their start of service and the other on day one, which we'll talk about in a minute. But by limiting the number of scheduled events or scheduled sessions that candidates have to attend, it limits the number of scheduling conflicts that somebody could run into. And we heard from a number of sponsors that it became tricky for you to schedule your on-site orientation and training because you weren't quite sure when your VISTA members were going to be expected to be in a virtual classroom or a webinar or some other activity related to their onboarding orientation. And then the last benefit here is one that Eileen had touched on, and that is freeing up resources that we would have spent on initial pre-service orientation and being able to apply those resources to other areas of member development further in service. So those are the benefits. Let's shift now and take a look at some of the potential risks that may come from having a virtual orientation. First and foremost, this is kind of the overarching thing, is that it requires all of us, all responsible parties as it's listed here, to really understand and perform our roles fully, accurately, and completely. So that means that the applicant screening process up front needs to be done thoroughly so that background checks are reviewed and references are contacted and reviewed, and that in the conversation that's happening during that screening and interview process, that you're making sure that your candidates are able to succeed in a virtual environment. And in a little bit we'll talk about options if that's not the case. But again, as we did with PSO Blend, we want to make sure that online self-directed learning is a mode that an individual is going to succeed with. Another part of the onboarding process is the completion of the required onboarding forms, taking the pre-service coursework, and then, of course, on the first day of service, taking the oath and submitting a properly completed member oath form. Again, all of those things need to happen, and they need to be done properly so that we can activate members, get them into service, and make sure that their benefits and their pay are not delayed. Next up is related to the VAD, the VISTA assignment description. Sponsors and supervisors need to know how to write a really good VAD and understand how it's used in managing and supervising VISTA members. Likewise, the VISTA member themselves need to understand what's in their VAD, what it means for them, what their roles are, and how to go about implementing it. If any of that breaks down, again, there's no PSO facilitator looking over the shoulder of the candidate to say, here's some questions you might want to ask. So the VAD has to be done really well. And of course, the state office, the CNCS state office, has a role in reviewing those VADs and making sure that they're well written. And then the last major responsibility here is around that OSOT, that on-site orientation and training that you all are providing to your VISTAs when they come on site. So it's as important as ever to make sure that those on-site orientation and trainings are well designed and well implemented, that good intentions don't fall by the wayside, but that they actually VISTA actually gets all of the pieces that were intended, and that they're done in a way that it really supports the pieces that are delivered in the virtual training, so that it underscores all of the things that the VISTA candidates are learning about the VISTA program, its mission, their role in it, their responsibilities. In addition to all of those things around the roles that all of us play in the onboarding process are some of the technical or the more logistical pieces. So first, with a virtual training, one that's conducted all online, internet connectivity is essential. So those of you who have operations in very rural areas or in areas that are not well served with internet connection, this virtual orientation may not work in all locations. So we're going to rely on you to let your state office know where that's the case so that we can make other arrangements and we can plan accordingly. Likewise, for individual VISTA candidates who have low English proficiency or they don't have strong computer proficiency, they probably won't do well in a self-directed online training. So again, you'll need to let us know, let your state office know when you have candidates with those conditions, and we will then direct you to more appropriate training resources for them. And the last bullet here relates to what we're calling it VISTA identity, but it's some of the more intangible elements that we're able to provide to people when they're at PSO. So it's that sense of belonging to something big. It's that understanding that they're part of the VISTA movement, that VISTA has a long history, and that they can see and feel the energy and the enthusiasm of the VISTA program, that they get excited, motivated by other VISTA members, and that they develop that esprit de corps and that sense of networking and develop connections to others that they can draw on as resources throughout their VISTA service. We know that it's difficult to do that online. We're working on it, but certainly are open to ideas and suggestions that you all might have of how we could shore up and strengthen that sense of VISTA identity. So note that the last few bullets that I just talked about, the connectivity, English and computer proficiency, we haven't yet mitigated those risks for this coming year, but we're working on it. Do want to know that we do have, as we have for decades, we do have full ADA compliance for our training. So if you have folks who need accommodation or through other situations need ADA assistance, again, let us know or have your candidates indicate that, and we're fully prepared to deliver. All right, so I think this is a good chance for us to pause and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Andy. You can always ask questions through the Q&A panel, but I am going to invite Candy, our operator, to just give us the instructions on how to ask a question by phone. Candy, are you there?
Yes, thank you. For participants on the phone, to ask a question, it's *1, please. Please unmute your line and record your name only to be introduced. Again, for questions or comments, press *1. If you'd like to withdraw the request, you may press *2. Thank you. One moment, please, while the questions register.
Thank you so much, Candy. So we do have some questions that have come in through the Q&A. So Patrick, Andy, I'm going to lob these to you as they come in.
Excellent.
You ready? All right. The first question is this how PSO will work for members whose start date is February 5th?
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Not much more to say.
Not much more to say, yes.
Whoever asked that question, you put your finger right on it. February 5th is our pilot, our very first pilot, and we will be evaluating it. And in the spirit of continual improvement, looking at that feedback and seeing where its strengths and weaknesses lie.
Wonderful. We may get to this next question here in a little bit, but just to keep it on our radar, Kelsey asks, how long does it typically take for a member to get through the self-directed VMO?
It's an interesting question. And when I present the curriculum, you'll have a much better sense than me simply giving you a number. But in the spirit of just giving numbers, let's say that including attending both webinars, it's somewhere between 12 and 15 hours. It really depends on how quickly a person completes the paperwork and then participates and works their way through the coursework. It can be a very individual experience.
Wonderful. This next question I'm going to kind of answer because I know we're going to get to this here in a minute.
Yeah.
It's kind of 3 questions in one. Is there a time limit to complete the VMO? And will the oath process remain the same, or will sites be responsible for scheduling? Which, thank you for that question. We are going to get to that process here in just a little bit of who does what the timeline is. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, check back in with us after we go over that information.
I think that's right. You know, we're pausing for question and answer here just to address any clarification around what we've covered, the motivations, the risks, and the benefits. And if people are prepared to dive into what is the curriculum and the process, then we can do that quickly. But let me turn to Candy.
Yes.
And see if there's anybody online. Operator, do we have anyone online in queue?
Currently, we're showing no questions. As a reminder for parties on the phone, you may press *1.
Wonderful. So just a few more questions here.
Okay.
Julie has a question around what plans are in place to add the meaningful post-orientation training or in-service opportunities that were mentioned. What plans are in place for that?
I will address it very briefly, very high level. We're developing a set of core curricula that will be available to all projects and all state offices. So they'll have the opportunity to take a look at the sessions that over the years we have been able to identify as being perennial favorites of our members. And we drew that data from our post-PSO evaluation, our mid-year survey of members, our survey of leaders, and finally our post-webinar survey of members, of which we have 24 a year. That is primarily what we're doing in terms of curriculum. And then, of course, we'll revisit our budget once we have a sense of what our budget is, and then we'll be able to look at funding and approaches in terms of where, how many, all of that. So it's still a bit preliminary. As I say, we haven't really been able to focus greatly on that, as we are very much focused on this virtual member orientation.
Thank you, Patrick. We'll take 2 more quick questions before we move on to the next section. The first question is, what is this going to look like this year when we're having both classics and the VMO? So how is that going to look?
That's a really great question. So I'm also looking at Andy, but I would say I think it's going to look beautiful. So our calendar, which I believe they all have access to or have received through their state offices, our calendar kind of reflects what it will look like. We have, Andy, how many events in person would you say we have? Top of your head?
26.
Yeah, I would have said 25, so, and you're much more exact than I am. So we have about 26 in-person events scheduled most heavily in the summer because, as you all know, that's our biggest turnover in the core. But then we have another 10 events running side by side that are virtual. And as we get into July and August, we have them every 2 weeks. So you will have the opportunity to determine what's best for your recruitment needs and for the members training needs? Are they best suited for an in-person? And you know, would they learn best in an in-person? Or, in fact, given logistics, given learning styles, is the virtual PSO better for them? And so that is pretty much a very straightforward approach to the virtual versus the in-person.
Thank you. And the last question we'll quickly take here before we move on to the next section is, will members still get to view answers of other members like they did in the PSO blend? Will there be any interaction among the new members?
No, that's a wonderful question as well. There's no facilitation in this. If there is any facilitation, any overview of the work that they're doing, it will come from your self-motivation as a supervisor. You'll see in this next slide, and I'm going to use this question as a segue to the next slide, that not that more importance is given to the on-site orientation and training that's implemented by you, the sponsor and supervisor, but we rely to a greater extent on the effective interaction between you and the onboarding member. And we suggest that using the coursework that we offer the member as a means to discuss important dimensions to your project is a really wonderful use of the on-site orientation and training.
Perfect segue, Patrick.
All right.
So now we're going to get to the VMO at a glance.
Shall we?
We will. So this is just this beautiful screen here that we have is really just kind of what each different party is responsible for and kind of what that flow of enrollment to start date to getting into those first few weeks of service is going to look like. So first we have the state office. So, you know, you as supervisors, you recruit, you interview VISTA members, you tell your state office, hey, I have these people, I want to place them. They're ready to start. So the state office, once the person has accepted service, the state office places them into their service term, enrolls them in the virtual member orientation, and then they will be holding an onboarding call for VISTA members or for those VISTA candidates to go over some basic information around their service. For the February 5th virtual member orientation, the VISTA training team is actually going to be doing that call for all VISTAs in this virtual orientation. This is our first one. We're doing it. We're piloting it, so we want to test everything out. So we will be holding that call. That call will come like about a week before someone is scheduled to start. So for those in the February 5th virtual member orientation, that call will be held on January 30th. So it really just try to help them, the VISTA member, get ready for their first day of service. Do you know who your supervisor is? Do you know where you're going for your first day? Have you done all your forms? Are you informed about your benefits? I'm just really trying to get them prepared for day one. So then, once the VISTA member is enrolled, so the state office enrolls them in that virtual member orientation, they receive an auto-generated email from the My AmeriCorps system that says, hey, you're in an orientation, and these are the things that you need to do in order to start. So it leads them to our Starting VISTA page, which tells them what forms they need to complete, what courses they need to complete, and we'll talk about those here in just a little bit. They also are sent what we call the Guide to Entering VISTA Service. This Guide to Entering VISTA Service is given to them about 2 weeks before they start, and it outlines what needs to be completed before they start. It gives them the registration links for the pre-service webinar, the one that takes place, that onboarding call that takes place before they start, as well as information for that first day webinar that they're going to attend. So all of that information is there. We send that out to them. We also send it to state office staff and ask them to forward it on to you if you have VISTA members in that orientation, so that everyone kind of has the same information and is ready to go. So then what does the training unit do? The training unit conducts the launching webinar. It's launching your VISTA service, and it takes place on their first day of service. So for the February 5th, it'll take place on February 5th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. At that time, we induct them, so we do the swearing in, we have them recite the oath, and we allow them to ask questions. We go over a few things about the VISTA program and allow them to get some questions answered during that time. While we're doing that launching webinar and when they're being inducted into service, you as their supervisor should be there to witness their oath and ensure that they submit it correctly, meaning that you've signed it, that they were there, you knew that they were there watching the webinar, that they were successfully sworn in. Also, you're responsible as a supervisor to review the VAD with them. Andy had mentioned the importance of the VAD earlier, and so did Patrick. So going over the VAD, making sure everyone's on the same page, and also implementing an on-site orientation and training, making sure they know all the good stuff that they need to do, and then you know, working to make sure that they have an easy transition into VISTA service. So that was a lot, but now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick.
Let me go off script for just a second and ask you, is there anything in that process that is brand new, that we haven't done either in the PSO Classic or in the PSO Blend?
Everything is the same.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that is a little different is that pre-call.
Right.
So that call that happens before they start service, that's the only thing that's a little bit new. But the forms are all the same, the coursework is all the same, the information / guide to entering VISTA service is the same.
Right.
The launching webinar on their first day is the same. Really the only thing that's different is that pre-call, the pre-service call.
Gotcha. So the process then is essentially the same. Probably the greatest change then is the need for tighter alignment of all of these pieces, because we rely, as Andy said earlier on, we rely on everybody knowing their responsibilities and carrying them out both accurately and in a timely manner. So let's take a look then at what the curriculum actually is, and it should be familiar to you as well. All right, so in terms of the member's responsibility, the entry into service paperwork is identical. There's nothing that has changed. Now, we've called the fingerprint cards that they receive at site in order to send in their fingerprints and have the FBI criminal history check as part of their paperwork. So everything up to the acceptance of the terms and conditions must be done before they arrive at site, and the fingerprint cards should be given by you supervisors to your members on that very first day. The campus coursework is also identical to the coursework that was required in the PSO Blend, with a subtle but important exception. All right, so terms and conditions must absolutely be taken and accepted. The civil rights and responsibilities, again, must be reviewed and its terms and conditions accepted in the portal. Then the overview of the member benefits, the mission and the legacy of VISTA, an overview of the campus, its contents and its site map, how it's structured, and then finally a test of their knowledge. There's a difference here from the PSO Blend in that instead of requiring the individual to retake the test if they don't get 10 out of 10, we will give them the answer if they miss it on the first try. our focus here is to ensure that they get the salient points. So we don't want to necessarily test them and hound them, but rather educate them and give them the resources that they need. It also, as you can imagine, simplifies the follow-up. So the administrative burdens, the VMO compared to the PSO blend are much lighter for you, for the member, and for us in training. And then finally, there are 2 webinars. These are the only pieces that are not asynchronous. These are live, in time. So as Jessica said earlier, there's the introduction and a clarification of the onboarding process. We're sending them guidance, so it's all written out, but we believe that it will behoove both the member and the state office to have a little human contact and enforce the importance of certain steps in this process. And then finally, on the very first day, we'll do the orientation and the induction webinar. It's about an hour and a half long and somewhat similar to those of you who are familiar with the PSO Blend curriculum, very similar to the Launching Your VISTA Service webinar in the PSO Blend. Somewhat different given the different context of this training, but the intentions, the learning objectives are very similar. All right, let's take a look at the next piece. This, you'll remember I said that there's a slight difference in the online coursework. Here's where the difference is. We're requiring only those 6 courses be completed before they show up at site. Yeah, 6, all the way down to the test your knowledge. The other really significant courses and tutorials that we highly suggest they participate in are better done once they're at site. So you see here, making the most of OSOT, which is really a kind of checklist for those who are new to the professional world, maybe have never gone through an orientation at the workplace. And then understanding your VAD as a tutorial, as well as also another checklist, a brief video on how poverty is measured, a really excellent and well-received course on creating a community profile, which is linked to a number of data points in real time. The minute intro, which has proven to be very useful in introducing the member both to the community as well as to your staff on site. An overview of the theory of change as it relates to poverty or anti-poverty social justice programs. And then 13 Lessons of Poverty, which is a presentation by Dr. Pimper. We feel that these can't be done beforehand, and they're very well received in the PSO Blend, so we're strongly recommending that they do them once they're on site. To you, my colleagues and fellow supervisors, I might recommend that you use some of this material in your on-site orientation and training. I think it can do nothing but add another rich dimension to the work that you've already prepared. And of course, then, the other aspect is the on-site orientation and training. And in that, you are introducing them to the project, its purpose and goals. As Jessica mentioned before, the VAD. They're being able to understand the milestones, the tasks, and the skills required to implement the VAD is imperative. Should they not, it's an existential risk to the project and the program. I can't emphasize that enough to you. The introduction to your organization and an introduction to your community, it's foundational to their service and to an on-site orientation. And then finally, the supervisory relationship. I think we've mentioned in the past that surveys have reflected that the most important aspect of the training cycle in VISTA is the relationship the member has with you. Your guidance, your mentorship, your being available for everyday support really means the world of difference between fully successful and, well, we got through a year. So communication protocols, how to troubleshoot issues in the project, these are issues that we hope you'll address during your OSOT, the on-site orientation and training. All right. So before we pause a second and take questions, let's just look at a few other in-service opportunities. Andy, would you mind addressing those?
Sure. So as many of you probably know, we already have and currently offer a whole range of in-service training opportunities for VISTA members. First and foremost on the list here are our accredited courses. Two of them are 10-week-long courses, very popular, very much in demand. In fact, we just had an enrollment period close over the weekend, and we had over 700 people apply for those courses. So you may know that one of them is in volunteer mobilization. The other is in resource development, fundraising, and grant writing. We're currently working on developing 2 additional courses, one on community entry, the other on community engagement, and we're excited to be able to offer those hopefully later this year. In addition to that, you're probably familiar with our webinar series. Every month we offer 2 different webinars for VISTA members, as well as webinars for VISTA leaders and supervisors as well. Patrick mentioned earlier that we're branching out into other media formats, so we're looking at and in the process of developing podcasts and videos. We're editing some existing content in our recorded on-demand webinars to make them shorter, more accessible, easier for folks to listen to on the go, and making them a little more topical. So that work continues this year. Those resources and learning opportunities continue to be available throughout the year for VISTA members. Likewise, we are looking forward this year towards to offering some additional in-service training opportunities. You may be aware in the last couple of years through our state offices, we provided funding to make available face-to-face, in-person, in-service training opportunities for VISTA members, and those are happening in clusters all across the country. So we're looking forward to being able to do that. Of course, it's resource dependent, and as you know, if you've watched the news We don't yet have a full budget for the year, so we are somewhat constrained in our planning around that because we don't yet know what we have to work with. But hopefully by freeing up some travel dollars and other resources that we would have put towards PSO, those resources should be available for in-service training. And we're working on training designs, curricula, to make it a little bit easier for VISTA sponsors and state offices to help direct us in planning the types of topics that are of interest and putting together a curriculum that will meet the needs of their VISTA members. So those are in-service opportunities that are available now and what we're looking to develop later this year. So that, I think, is a good point for us to pause again and see if there are questions related to what we've just covered. Patrick talked about the curriculum, the pieces in the virtual member orientation, the on-site orientation and training, and then we just looked at the in-service training opportunities.
Thank you, Andy. So once again, we're going to take some Q&A here, as Andy just mentioned. If you want to ask a question over the phone, as Candy had mentioned earlier, you need to press *1 and state your name clearly so that she can queue you up. So do that, press *1, and we'll queue you up. So let's get into some questions that have come in the chat. So Patrick, actually, I'm changing it up. Going off script here, Patrick.
Love it, love it.
A lot of questions have come in regarding this February 5th BMO. So I do just want to give some information. Candidates who are enrolled and planning to start February 5th, they have all already at this time been sent the Guide to Entering VISTA Service. The Guide to Entering VISTA Service details, as I said, their dates of their pre-service webinar, their day 1 webinar, and what they need to get done. This information was also sent to all of your state offices, and they should have forwarded this to you. If you've not yet received it and you have candidates in that virtual member orientation, please contact them so that you are aware of what's going on. As Patrick and Andy mentioned, the webinars are about an hour, hour and a half each. There was a question about, hey, can I join my member on these webinars? Can I sit in with them? Yes. You can definitely sit in with them. We ask, if at all possible, for you to sit with them while they're logged in. Some of our systems have a little bit of a limit on numbers of people who can join, and we need to make sure there's enough space for all the VISTA members to get on who are going to be there. But we welcome you to be a part of those. Sit in and listen with your VISTA.
I think it only makes it a richer experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to stop and pause about that because I know that that was a big question.
That was excellent.
And Jessica, this is Andy. If I could just add to that, there have been a few folks interested to say, hey, can we see the materials? Can we see the curriculum if I want to look at the worksheet so I can build it into my OSOT? Is that possible? And the answer is absolutely yes, and you can look at it, well, I wouldn't say right now because you're on this briefing, but right after this briefing, go to vistacampus.gov, and on the top menu, look under VISTAs, look for Starting VISTA. It's in the pre-service category for VISTA members. Go to Starting VISTA, click the link for the virtual member orientation, and it's all laid out right there. You can download the activities. It's a great idea if you want to use Our Bad worksheet as part of your on-site orientation and training. Excellent if you want to preview the videos on how poverty is measured and 13 lessons about poverty. Think about how that ties into your VISTA project, what poverty looks like in your community. Great idea. So I applaud you all for thinking along those lines, and no need to wait. It's all available.
It's a wonderful idea. I would also put in a plug for the theory of change, especially if you have a smarty pants member who's going to say, okay, so what's our theory of change? You may want to see the range that we offer them. It might be orienting to you as well.
That's right, and Andy, I did post also the link in the chat for them to go directly to that site, so we're already on the same page here.
Thank you, Jessica.
Of course. This is a question just around, it's kind of around the balance of classic and and classic PSO, the in-person. Yes. So someone said, they asked, I apologize for covering ground from the prior section, but do you anticipate VMO entirely replacing classic at some point, or is it the plan to run these both together for, like, all time?
You know, I hesitate to talk about 2019. It's difficult to predict next month. So if you will permit me to say what I can predict and what I do know is that we will offer both between now and fiscal year 2019. As we roll these out and we evaluate the model, we will be able to better and definitively state whether 2019 will have both or that we'll shift exclusively to a virtual model. So the jury is out on that, but it's a very important and smart question.
Thank you. Another question came up around any resources or tools for those that may have low English proficiency or low technical skills. Like, what are our recommendations for those folks I guess, when thinking about PSO enrollment or onboarding?
Great question. Andy often speaks to this, and so I'm going to let him do it.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, of course, that's one of the beauties of our PSO Classic. It doesn't require anyone to have technical competence in computers or online or to have a strong internet connection because you're right there in the room and it's all person-to-person, face-to-face. Likewise, for people with English proficiency issues or literacy issues, again, we can provide materials in a number of formats with Classic. We have bilingual facilitators as well. We offer PSO both in English and Spanish, and we can provide interpreters for folks who need other language support, including sign language. So PSO Classic is a great, it's just a great resource, and it has so many opportunities for addressing those individual learner needs. The thing is, we need to know early on so that we can plan, and sponsors or supervisors need to know early on so that they can plan to send their person to the right event. Because if we find out the day before PSO, and gee, the virtual event was 2 weeks ago, then it's a little bit late, you know, or if we just missed a Classic enrollment deadline so anyway, that kind of gets back to the point I wanted to make earlier, where in the interview process, you know, we want supervisors to be really aware of those kinds of considerations so that not only are you thinking about, well, how is this person going to perform in the role as a VISTA, but what kind of training environment will they do best in? And then you can plan from the outset to line them up for that training where they're going to succeed.
It's a challenging equation, but I'm so glad that you raised the issue of in the interview process, or at least when you're finalizing that onboarding and choosing the individual who you feel is best suited for your project, to consider their pre-service orientation and explore in what environment will they learn best, what suits you best. And of course, timing is part of that equation as well, and you have to balance those two.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Patrick. I want to see, Candy, is there anybody over the phone who's asking a question?
Thank you. Currently, we're showing no questions. Again, as a reminder, parties may press *1, please.
Thanks, Candy. Another question, and this one I think we're going to lob to Andy because that's what I want to do today. Mandy asks. Mandy, actually, fun fact, was one of our speakers yesterday on our webinar. So welcome, Mandy.
And well received.
Well received. So thank you, Mandy. Mandy asked, do supervisors have the access to the curriculum for the blend courses, the ACE accredited ones? Well, do they have access to those? Is there a way they can get access? Just to know what's being covered.
Well, you can certainly see the course syllabus It's posted online on the VISTA campus, and it outlines the 10 weeks, what happens each week, each segment of the content, where the webinars happen, which readings are suggested and required. So that's visible to everybody. If you just go to vistacampus.gov/VistaBlend, I think those courses still pop up there. Otherwise, just go to the Connect and Learn section, and you'll see the online courses there. I'm guessing that's what Mandy's looking for?
Yeah. Awesome. So 2 quick questions here. So Aiden wants to clarify.
Yes.
New members are required to complete all the activities on the member responsibilities pre-service slide, so the W4. But the activities on the member responsibilities in service slide are just highly recommended but not required.
That is correct.
Okay, that's it. That was an easy answer there, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I would be disappointed and they would be missing out, but it is definitely strongly recommended. Not required to the extent that I will release the hounds of hell until they complete them with the threat of removing them from service.
No hounds of hell.
I believe that's what's behind the question. Yes.
Last question before we move on. Will the webinars in VMO have closed captions?
Yes. So in terms of ADA compliance, the Americans with Disabilities Act, we are fully ADA compliant.
I do just want to add one thing to that. It is helpful for us to be notified as well, just to have a heads up if there's something that someone needs. You know, we want to make sure everyone has all the materials they need and kind of understands what the VMO is going to look like and what to expect. So it gives us a chance if we have notification up front that, hey, someone maybe, for example, has low vision, and then we could send them the slides ahead of time. It's helpful for us just to know. So if you have someone, have them reach out to the training coordinator for that VMO or to the state office, just so that we're in the loop. We just want to help out. Great. So now let's go ahead and move on.
Perfect. You read my mind, Jessica, and why don't you address the issue of communications?
Okay, great. So communications to VISTA members. So as I mentioned before, when a candidate is enrolled in a virtual member orientation, the my.americorps.gov system sends an automatic email to the candidate directing them to review information on the VISTA campus that they need to complete in order to start service and to be prepared for the VMO. At the virtual member orientation deadline, all enrolled candidates are sent that guide to entering VISTA service. That includes specific dates of webinars, deadlines to complete their work, links to register for those webinars, and just some greater detail about what to expect for their first days of service and their on-site orientation and training. Also, if any of your VISTA candidates are relocating to serve, the VISTA Member Support Unit will reach out to them regarding their relocation approvals. The VISTA Member Support Unit also contacts candidates if they're missing onboarding forms. So if a candidate hasn't done their direct deposit yet, hasn't certified their terms and conditions, they will also follow up with that as well. We also give them a reminder about the Countdown to VISTA Service onboarding webinar. We will give them some reminders about that. We'll also do a reminder to them on the morning of that day one launching your VISTA Service webinar to just say, hey, don't forget, this is going on today. And then obviously we communicate with them in those webinars by swearing them in and giving them some more information about their service. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's going to talk a little bit about the communications that we provide to you as supervisors.
And just to be clear, those communications mirror the communications that we currently perform.
Correct. The only one that's a little different is the pre-webinar. That's the only thing that's a little different with these communications.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. And in terms of communicating to supervisors, this process mirrors, I think, what we do with PSO Classic. So, and a little bit what we did last year with the PSO Blend. So We have on the VISTA campus guidance for VISTA supervisors that highlights their role in the virtual member orientation. And as Jessica mentioned, once we send the guide to entering VISTA service to all the candidates who are enrolled in a particular virtual orientation, like we do with PSO Classic, the state office will forward that to any supervisor who has candidates enrolled in that event. So, so earlier this week, the guide for February 5th was emailed out to all the candidates who are enrolled. We sent it to the state offices for them to forward on. So hopefully by now, if you've got somebody enrolled in February 5th, you've been copied on that guide. And so you can look at it, you can see the dates, you can see the links to all the coursework that's included. Now, some questions came up I saw in the chat or the Q&A earlier. Well, what happens if somebody doesn't do something? What if there's an issue? What if something's missing? So in those cases, it's going to be the state office who will be following up with you and your members if there's a compliance issue. Say, for instance, the candidate hasn't done their onboarding work, and it's a day or two before they're supposed to start service. Of course, our VISTA member support unit and our criminal history check unit will be part of this process, but it'll be the state office who will be doing that follow-up work. Likewise, if an oath form is submitted incorrectly or if it's missing, if it's not turned in on time, you'll be hearing from your program officer at the state office. They've got a stronger relationship with you. They know better than we who's involved in the project and how to reach you. So we feel like we can get out of the way and let you work with the people that you typically work with right there at your state office. So we're trying to simplify the process, streamline instructions, make it absolutely clear for folks what needs to be done by when, and hopefully compliance issues will become fewer. So that's it for communication with supervisors. Patrick, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. So let's use the next couple of slides to sort of recap and focus on what are the roles that you play. And we've tried to highlight through this that really there's very little change in terms of roles and responsibility. But as we enter into this asynchronous virtual environment, the alignment of our roles needs to leave very little daylight in between. We need to be clear on what's expected of us, what's the quality or the standards that are expected, and when do we have to do it. So in terms of the pre-service part, the development of a VAD that's of high quality for every VISTA. It has been your roles and responsibility, and it remains such. Of course, the sub bullet to that is, and please ensure that they're in the hands of the VISTA. I believe you have all experienced through the beauty of e-grants that uploading the correct VAD and ensuring that the VAD that you have worked so hard on has gotten to the VISTA, and that somehow the summer associate's VAD didn't show up is going to be really important. We're hoping that that pre-service onboarding call with the state office will mitigate some of that risk, but that's number one. Number two, please, in the process of bringing the people on, check their references and ask about criminal history. I think my experience here is that a certain percentage are overlooking that aspect of criminal history and are blindsided once the member comes on board and we discover through the FBI fingerprint check that there is a criminal history that impacts their service with you. Of course, as Andy said earlier, please assess the applicant's suitability for the VMO. They may be better in the in-person environment rather than the virtual environment. Yeah, enough said there. Guide the candidates in their onboarding work. So we hope, first, our guide to entering VISTA service will spell it out in very specific terms with deadlines, and then reinforce that through that onboarding call with the state office. But your help in this never hurts. It can only help us. And then finally, please prepare the workstation prior to day one. The vast majority, the overwhelming majority of you do that. There are those cases. So no surprises there, I believe. That's what we have. Andy, do you want to pick up what happens after pre-service?
Sure. So, as with the PSO blend that we've offered in the past couple of years, if you're familiar with that, on what we call day one, their service start date, your VISTA members or VISTA candidates at that point show up at their service site, meet with their site supervisor, and they start to get the tour and, you know, get oriented to their site. That afternoon, we hold a webinar that we're calling Launching Your VISTA Service, and every candidate who's in that cohort for that member orientation needs to participate in that webinar. That's where we, again, provide them with a welcome and an overview of the VISTA program and its mission, review some of the key terms that they need to understand for their service, and then we administer the oath of service to them. They're not there for that. They can't take the oath. And if they don't take the oath, they're not officially a VISTA. So that's why it's important for them to be on the webinar. Now, in advance of the webinar, you need to make sure that they've got a printed copy of the oath form, and it has to be the new current oath form. We just released a new version of the oath form about a month ago. So if you have old copies, please recycle them or use them for scrap paper. And download the new oath form, print it out, make sure they've got it on their first day of service. Give them the fingerprint kit, as you do with all your VISTAs on their first day of service, and then make sure that they've got it on their calendar for that afternoon webinar, typically 3 p.m. Eastern time. We also ask that you be available during that webinar, that you're there, you sit with them, you can actually literally witness them take that oath. So you can then sign the oath form with them as a witness. You can scan it and then submit it to the VISTA Member Support Unit according to the instructions on the form. So those are the supervisor roles there.
Andy, can I ask a clarifying question? There are cases where supervisors need to be absent on day one. Of course. What would they do in a case like that?
Sure. So if you, the supervisor, need to be absent on that first day of service, of course you've designated somebody else to be there in your stead to welcome the VISTAs so they're not just wandering the halls on their own. Please let that individual know that they should be ready to serve as the witness to that oath form, and just clue them in on how to scan that form so that they can email it in on your behalf. Can't stress enough how important it is to get the oath forms in a timely manner. The rules around that have shifted a little bit. You probably saw that with the new oath form. It needs to be the same day the oath is taken. It needs to be received by us. So no more 48 hours, because 48 hours turned into 72 hours, and then we didn't know, was somebody serving, were they not serving? It became way too unmanageable.
It's a legal issue.
It is a legal issue, yeah. So it's the lawyers telling us it needs to be that same day, and really there's no reason that it can't be on that day. So that's it for day one. And then as the VISTAs continue in service, you know, particularly during those first couple of weeks, it really is important, it's essential that you as the supervisor sit with your VISTA several times to review their VAD, make sure they understand it, and unpack each piece of it in depth so that it's one thing to say, you know, convene a group of stakeholders from the community. You know, what does that look like? How often does that happen? Who's involved? Who are we missing? You know, what does that role look like for the VISTA? A little bit of time invested there goes a long way in success for VISTAs to complete that VAD. And then, of course, as you always do, to provide an effective on-site orientation and training. We've talked a lot about that and gotten some ideas about how you might even integrate some of the VMO activities, some of those worksheets, into your OSOT. So that's not really new, but just some of the important pieces around that day one, making sure the oath form is there, making sure you or a designee is there to witness, and send that oath to the BMSU the same day. And I think that's it. I think now.
Yeah.
Question.
You know, Andy, before we shift, and Jessica, I just want to reiterate what you said, that it's not new. It's just that the safety nets are no longer there, right? So we don't have a second or third set of eyes on these things because they're at an in-service PSO, an in-person PSO. That's the piece that I think we have to reiterate and stress.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Patrick. So we're now going to answer the questions that you may still have lingering. I'm going to invite Candy back on for one last time just to give us the instructions on how to ask a question. Candy?
Thank you. As a reminder for parties on the phone, it's *1 for questions. And please unmute your line and record your name. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of questions have come up. Just a reminder, this will be available in about a week from now. We are recording this session, and it will be posted on the VISTA campus. And you will receive an email once those files are posted. So just as a thing there.
Thank you, Ms. Birch.
Of course. So let's take a look and see what questions are coming up here. A lot of questions around how do I know what the VMO schedule is? When are they going to be? What are the classics? If you have questions about what events or PSOs or VMOs that you should aim for, you really want to talk to your state office. They'll help you look at what what your requirements are, what you're looking for to onboard people, and what PSO and VMO schedules you should plan for.
Can I just raise? That's a really wonderful default and rule of thumb, if I may say that, that we will make information available to you on the VISTA campus under the supervisor page, but for specific dates, deadlines, and processes, we rely on our colleagues in field liaison at the state offices, your project officers and your directors, your state directors, to communicate directly with you. So they're our liaison, and we continue to rely on them. So any questions like that, please don't hesitate to ask your state office, and of course they almost always have the answer readily. If they don't, they'll turn to us and we'll together ensure that you get the answer.
Thank you, Patrick. Some more questions have been coming up around communication to supervisors. So, so with PSO Blend, I think a lot of supervisors who had candidates in PSO Blend saw that when candidates were enrolled, we communicated directly. The VISTA training team communicated directly with supervisors saying, hey, this person's missing this, or hey, these are the dates. But that's different with the VMO.
Yes,
it's a little different. So,
a little different.
Yeah, so you want to talk a little bit about the difference there and what they should expect and who they should expect communication from?
Such an insightful question. With the PSO blend, it absolutely required us to work with you hand in glove because of the many requirements of their attending virtual classrooms, of submitting homework at particular dates, and the required follow-up that potentially led to their being removed from service. We have removed that layer of administration. So we can go back then to a tried, true, and by that I mean probably close to 50 years of the chain of communication where we directly communicate with the state office, and the state office will communicate to you when it comes to the key issues of compliance. And those key issues are going to be the acceptance of terms and conditions of service and the submission of the oath form, as well as the other paperwork. So the VMSU, the member support unit, that is, the training unit and the state offices will coordinate this information and will rely on the state office to send that coordinated message to you. So that is a subtle yet important difference in the communication. Once these folks are sworn in and become members, then all communications will be channeled through the state office.
And so just to make sure I have a point of clarification here,
yes.
The terms and conditions completion, the oath submission, and the fingerprint kits, like those came in, those are the only piece of the VMO that we are following up on to ensure they're completed, correct?
That is correct.
Correct. So we're also following up on the form, so the direct deposit, the W-4, those have to be completed, but those are the only things that part of the VMO that are going to be.
That is correct.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And I think we all understand if the onboarding paperwork isn't complete, we can't onboard an individual.
Right.
So it's not a training issue. It's actually an administrative issue.
Correct. Another question that came up was around the lead time for enrolling someone in the VMO. So someone asked, hey, if I miss a deadline for, like an enrollment deadline for a classic, is there a chance that there'd be another VMO deadline that would allow someone to start sooner and I wouldn't miss the deadline, so it would be after. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and so I'm going to say, yeah, there is a possibility, but the best thing to do is to actually look at the training calendar. Mm-hmm. So to the person or persons who have asked that question, please ask for the calendar from the state office, and so they can see where the variation lies. The state office needs to manage the entire portfolio of members coming on board. How they manage that is usually by identifying particular events and dates where they hold their projects accountable. And the VMO in no way overrules anything the state office has guided and directed the projects to do. Our motivation in training was to give as many opportunities for onboarding in support of the state offices managing the portfolio with their projects as possible.
Beautifully said, Patrick.
Thank you.
Let me go to Candy really quickly. Candy, do you have any questions that have come in over the phone?
Oh, we're showing no questions from the phone.
All right. Andy, are there any that you're seeing as well?
Well, there was a question that came in earlier, and I don't know that we really addressed it. It was around the fact that this February 5th virtual member orientation is a pilot, and we're going to be doing some evaluation and seeing how it goes. So I think it was Aiden who said, are we going to make the results of that pilot evaluation available?
That's a good question. I want to be as transparent. So let me be clear. It's always the trick of how to make them available, not whether I want to be transparent or the training unit wants to be transparent. To be honest with you, Aiden, I mean, let's talk reality here. If we get evaluations across the board in the pilot that we have a stinker and that these people have absolutely no idea where they are, what they're doing, or who they are, then you're definitely going to hear about that one way or another, and probably from many different angles. However, even in some of the pilots we have run that really were very close to stinkers, the answers were across the board, and it really became an issue of how do we focus it, how do we improve it. All right, so what you're going to see is a process of iteration and improvements, and we will feed back to our colleagues in the Office of Field Liaison what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the results of our evaluations are. We also want to include you as their supervisors in the evaluation process. Ideally, and I believe that we are going to be able to do this swiftly, is to not only have the perspective of the member and how they feel they're prepared for service and supported through the process, but also leaders, for those of you who have leaders in your project, as well as you, the supervisor. Do you feel that the person who showed up was prepared for service or is still blinking like a deer in the headlights? And then based on that feedback, we're going to make some important decisions. So I hope that you'll not only be involved in the feedback process, but you'll also be giving us feedback.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah.
Another question that came in is around the pre-call, like the pre-service call that we had discussed. And
yes, yes.
That I had mentioned that ultimately the state office would more than likely do it, but during this pilot we're going to be doing it.
Yeah.
The question came in and says, is the onboarding call mandatory for all state offices to do, or is it up to the state office to decide if they're going to do it?
I love that question because let me tell you now that we have, and we pride ourselves on acronyms. So the VVTT, which is the VISTA Virtual Training Team, composed of members of all 5 clusters and state representatives of all 50 states, are looking at certain roles and responsibilities in this process. And one of the outstanding questions right now is, will it be mandatory for state offices in one form or another to present this onboarding webinar? So spoiler alert, I feel strongly that it's very important. I see it as a risk mitigation factor. And I also see it as extremely good practice. However, I need to confer with my wise and good colleagues in the Office of Field Liaison to develop consensus around that opinion. One way or another, though, there will be some live outreach to the members. So stay tuned on that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, it would be in the form of a webinar or a conference call that candidates would dial into. So it's not like we're calling everybody on their cell phone saying, hey, let me spend an hour with you. And not that you gave that impression, but in case there were any
I wish we could, though. It'd be really lovely.
Yeah. So whether it's a webinar or a Skype meeting or just a plain old conference call that the state office does, or maybe a couple state offices band together, they do one for their region. Yeah. It's going to be something like that.
That's right. That's right.
Wonderful. Well, perfect timing, Patrick. That was our last question in the Q&A, and we're right on time.
Not
we're
bad.
Right to end, so do you want to wrap us up?
I will wrap us up. There's not much to say. Eileen said the most important thing, which is I consider it an honor to work with you, and I'm grateful for the effort that you put into both supporting our VISTAs and your work for social justice and economic equity in our nation that I believe makes our nation great. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope that we answered your questions. And of course, your program officers are always on call. If there are follow-up questions, please connect with them, and they will connect with us directly or through our virtual training team. So with that, I'll close the webinar, and Candy will close the call.